How can businesses champion international women's rights? I'm Veronica Dudo. Women's Biz Leader starts now. Welcome to Women's Biz Leaders, presented by Women's Biz Global, where each episode we dive into the world of female entrepreneurship and leadership, highlighting the journeys of remarkable women in business. I'll now hand it over to Annie Gibbins, founder and CEO of Women's Biz Global.
Welcome to the program. I'm Annie Gibbins, founder and CEO of Women's Biz Global. In this episode, we dive into the world of international women's rights law. Today, we are joined by a seasoned C-suite executive and advocate for diversity, inclusion, and women's rights, Dr. Yolanda Vega. Welcome to the program, Dr. Yolanda.
Thank you, Annie. Wonderful to be here today.
Great to have you sharing on this show, and what an important area to be an expert in and sharing the actual facts about women's rights. I'd love you to start the program by actually sharing, do you think we're doing it well promoting women in business, either domestically or internationally at the moment?
At the moment, well, I'd like to start with a positive. So yes, there is always progress. Unfortunately, sometimes on a global stage and in Australia, we take one step forward, but then there's a change of legislation or a change of government, and we take 5 steps back.
Wow.
Which is really unfortunate because it's a constant fight to be treated as humans, whether you're in Australia, in America, Japan, or elsewhere.
5 steps back is huge. Is that just because we've gone through COVID? And I know a lot of women self-sacrificed in COVID. They were the first to lose their jobs, often were part-time workers, casual workers, looking after children. Or is that actually just a situation that the world's moving so quickly and we can feel like we're progressing and it actually can backfire and go back like almost a generation in a very quick period of time?
So when I say 5 steps, I'm talking about mainly 1, culture, and then the 4 determinants, which is health, education, economic, and political participation. So those 4 determinants realistically allow for a pathway forward. So if we start from the beginning, culture. The Australian culture is very much still about mateship.
Yes.
A global culture, if we look at the various religions, which are some of the strongest advocates to hold women back, are based on male concepts and male traditions that have excluded women. When we have a female pope, maybe the conversation will start to change, but unfortunately, I don't think that will happen in our lifetime, although I will continue advocating until the day I die for women's rights. So across health, there's still a lot of issues. For example, women are not treated equally to men when they go to their GP. Case study after case study in every country that you can possibly poke at tells you the same data. It illustrates that GPs still treat women as though they are not worthy of being treated. Simple things like heart attacks, for example, right? When women go to the doctor with a heart issue, the great majority of them are told to go home, have an aspirin, no checkup, right? So we now have the data to show that women are dying more from heart attacks because their GP is ignoring them. And don't get me started on menopause, right? All of the issues that are experienced only by the female body appear to be less important. So there's not enough research. The male body is constantly used and the female body is ignored. If we go back from the beginning, the aspirin, for example, right? The aspirin was on the market for approximately 100 years, and then a woman said, the aspirin's killing women. Maybe we should change the recipe. And so it was changed, and now we know that less women die from taking aspirin or any of those common medications. But the issue here is that the female body is very different to the male body from a biological perspective. Yes. But the medical industry treats it as though the male body is the only important one. All the research is done on the male body, all the testing is done on the male body, and so the horrendous consequences that we see are then experienced by women because our hormones are very different. And so a medication or a test Or, you know, the old, oh yes, if you have a heart attack, you'll feel it in your right arm. Well, no, women don't feel it in their right arm, only men do. So that's health. From an education perspective, we've all been told, get an education, sweetie, and you'll be right. Well, that hasn't happened either, right? My generation, Generation X, we were the first generation to say, I'm going to go against my biological clock. I'm going to get a career, I'm going to study. But the research shows, and the data shows, that on average, globally, a woman that has a Bachelor of Arts, a man that has a Bachelor of Arts will still earn more than a woman that has a PhD with an extra 7, 10, 15 years education. So from an educational perspective, yes, we have access to education a lot more than we did, say, the last generation, but it's not producing what we expected. We were expecting that when women obtained an education, they will get equal pay. That still hasn't happened. From an international perspective, we've been talking about equal work for equal pay since 1919, right? So the International Labour Organization started advocating equal pay for equal work in 1919.
And we still earn,
now,
what was it, 13% less?
It depends on where you look.
It depends on the data source.
It's about, yeah, it depends on the industry and who you talk to. But
true.
yeah, it's anywhere between 15 and 25, depending on the industry.
Frightening, isn't it? We could talk a lot about this, and obviously it's a massive, massive topic. I would like to move on to migrant women, though. We're a very multicultural country here in Australia. What do you see as the major challenges specifically for migrant women, as opposed to, you know, myself coming from an Anglo origin?
So migrant women have all of the barriers that you and I encounter as white, privileged, educated women, and we already have a large quantity of barriers when we're talking about, you know, entering the business world. Absolutely. Migrant women have even more challenges because they may not be the right colour, their hair may not be the right straightening, whatever, you know, like there's these social expectations of how we should look and how we should act. When you come from another country, whether you migrate to America or you migrate to Australia, you have to deal not only with all those masculine expectations, but you also have to deal with the cultural differences and the language, right? Language is a really big barrier. So we see from the data and the research that migrant women can't enter the workforce because of all those barriers, language, their colour, their education. Australia and other economies don't recognise the education obtained from a different country. Even here in Australia, we don't recognise a lawyer who's been highly educated in the UK. And yet we're a colony. Like, how ridiculous, right? So for migrant women, it's extra hard. And additionally, the great majority of women around the globe tend to provide a service. They don't produce a product per se. So providing a service is even harder because you can't get angel capital. You can't get a lot of grants that governments and not-for-profits may offer because it's a service industry. So what we're seeing is when migrant women start up a business, they don't pay themselves a wage, they don't give themselves super because they don't even have enough income to survive. And that again is across all women business owners that are in the service industry. But as I said, with migrant women, the language and the cultural issues escalates the quantity of barriers that they encounter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that we do talk about those on this show. It's so important that our young women actually see role models. That's what I want for my daughters and my granddaughters now, to be actually able to see role models in any sphere of you know, it doesn't matter what race background you're from, but also in industries as well. I'd love you to talk on the area of international women's rights law then, and the legal frameworks that sort of are underpinning that. How is that helping the situation? How do we actually make a difference and have confidence that we are shifting the dial in this area?
So when it comes to women's international law, there's part of the UN is a convention which we signed back in, it started back in the 40s, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is otherwise known as CEDAW, C-E-D-A-W. So CEDAW is there to assist and also monitor how the member states ratify international law. So what I mean by ratify is when we say Australia or America goes to the UN and we say, yes, we agree with that international law, we'll sign it, then governments have to go home and ratify what they've signed.
Yeah.
With CEDAW, it's really important to understand that even though CEDAW has been extraordinarily helpful, especially for Australia, because without CEDAW, we would not have started the first and only Sex Discrimination Act that we have for women in Australia. So that was done back in the early 90s, 1984 from memory. If we compare that to a global power, the United States of America, they have yet to ratify CEDAW, right? So what does this mean? This means, and we're seeing it playing out now, without CEDAW being ratified by the Americans, they can do whatever they want, right? Irrespective of whether they sign it or not. But this is really problematic, and we're seeing it now with the abortion issue. Governments, great majority white privileged males, telling women how to act, how to conduct their bodies, and what they can and can't do. And a lot of this is very archaic concepts that come from religion, that women are a second-class citizen, that women are not as worthy as men, that women are just the baby factories and should stay at home. Like, if you read some of the stuff that comes out of these religious leaders' mouths, you think you would be back in the 1800s,
Sure
right?
would.
It's extraordinary. So religion has a lot to do with it. So to answer your question, yes, CEDAW has helped a lot of countries ratify law to help women, but there is no one there, you know, smacking them on the hand and saying, naughty, naughty boys, you didn't ratify. So they continue to marginalise women and subordinate us, regardless of where we live.
Great. So just to finish up then, because I feel like we could chat and chat and chat about this topic, and I definitely welcome more conversations around this in future shows. Is there any final comment that you'd be able to share that would, what sort of strategies, initiatives would you encourage someone listening that they could actually, you know, focus on to help more women go into successful leadership positions in Australia?
Great question. And I think the answer lies with women, right? We know that it is time to terminate the patriarchy as it has been for the last couple of 100 years. It's not working for society, it's not working for women, and it's not working for the environment. Having said that, we can't literally switch a button, which is what I'd like to do, and put all the men to sleep for a couple of years in order for us to fix it. So we women are the majority. We women need to help other women.
Brilliant way to finish the show. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you to our viewers. I hope you've learned a lot. Wow, what a confronting episode. So much to do to be able to really progress the rights of women in Australia and internationally. And you can see it's a global requirement that we actually partner up and start talking about this issue on a global stage. And where does it start? It starts with you, our fellow woman, and I look forward to your feedback back on the show towards me in that regard. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.